Donald Trump has given Vladimir Putin a 10-day ultimatum: make peace or else. And what is Volodymyr Zelensky thinking in Kiev about this ultimatum? Is it a warning to him? And what is it a warning to the world? There are a lot of people around the world a little bit worried about exactly how events are unfolding. It has some uncanny resemblances to World War One, and it is also, I guess, a little bit of a. There's a lot of people who are even saying that World War Three has already begun. Welcome, everyone. I am Jeff Rich, and this is the Burning Archive, a live stream. As you're joining, do join me and do join me and be part of the stream. And I'm just checking, I am actually functionally live. Yes, I am. It's always a real worry when you do this sort of thing all solo by yourself on live stream. Every time I do it, I've just got that little bit of worry that I'm sort of talking into the ether and nothing is happening, but I am indeed live. So as you join the stream, do press the like button, show your thanks. It really does help boost my presence on YouTube in the algorithm and share things around. So I've got a really interesting live stream for you today. No guest today. I did an extraordinary interview earlier in the week, late Monday night, with Marta Havrishko, the historian from Ukraine, about the protests in Ukraine. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the video, or in the live stream. And I really want to talk about 5 top issues today, and they're all very salient, and they're all, I think, well and help if you take a bit of a perspective on world history, which is kind of what I do on this channel and at my Substack at jeffrich.substack.com, then I really think adding in that historical perspective can really help you make sense of what's going on in the world right now. So the 5 big issues are: will Trump's 10 or 12 or whatever it is day ultimatum to Russia make a difference to the war or to the diplomacy around the war? And there's a bit of an uncanny, disturbing link between 10 days from now and a major historical event, which I'll tell you about shortly. And secondly, how important are the Ukraine protests, and is Ukrainian society rebelling against Zelensky's monopower regime? The idea of monopower is a term that is actually used in Ukraine. It was introduced to me by the wonderful historian Tariq Cyril Amar, who does a great live stream on Syriana analysis with Kivok Almasian. Do check that out. It's a weekly live stream, Cold War 2.0. And he talked about monovlada or monopower, the sort of regime of, I guess it's a kind of a authoritarian, to use a loose term, regime that's operating there in Ukraine. But will the protests that are going on in the streets of Kiev right now make a difference? And also, thirdly, will the Ukraine leadership or regime change? Will the Ukraine leadership, our friend Volodymyr Zelensky, will the Ukraine leadership or regime change after reports of a secret meeting with USA and Britain? The changes to the corruption agencies in Ukraine have not really quite gone to plan, as I discussed with Marta Havrishko. And just turning that little ticker off. and maybe Volodymyr Zelensky is in trouble. There are certainly reports to that of that that I will discuss. Indeed, there is a report. It's now been widely circulated and reported in multiple sources that there was a, quote, secret meeting between certain elements of the current Ukrainian government and both the United States and British intelligence agencies. What is that about? Does it signal a potential reason for Volodymyr Zelensky to be worried, as, or at least quizzical, as he does seem to be right there? Okay, I'll just get rid of that. Fourth issue, will an India-China rapprochement be the start of a new Eurasian peace? I've got some really interesting intelligence for you on that from a recent speech from none other than the Russian foreign minister. But also in the last day or so, there has been a major debate in the Indian Parliament, Lok Sabha, I think. I should have checked the name before Lok Sabha maybe, before I came, but the Indian National Assembly, a debate between government and opposition, but about the success, nature, details of the Operation Sindoor, the events in, I think it was May this year. About, I'm just laughing at a couple of the comments there, but I will keep focusing on the stream. A couple, a debate about how well that went, whether there were some issues with it, and also whether the nature of that operation, which is remarkable because, of course, I mean, it was authorised by the Indian executive without parliamentary approval, so I guess it's no different to any other operation there. But it's quite remarkable, I guess. India, which some people have challenged in terms of its quality of democracy, an argument I think that Salvatore Babones has rather comprehensively dismissed and successfully dismissed in his just published book, Dharma Democracy. India is having the kind of debate around, a live debate in the midst of ongoing operation, because India has only just paused Operation Sindoor, about a major military operation. But there are also, and in that report, there were issues raised about the role of Chinese diplomacy or Chinese intelligence or Chinese military assistance for Pakistan in the Operation Sindoor. But more significantly, I think, as I have discussed on the channel previously, there is some question about whether indeed there will be a rapprochement, getting the band back together, so to speak. Not that they've ever been all that much together, but India and China may establish a more cooperative relationship, perhaps less suspicious and less antagonistic relationship. And just as a, non-Indian, non-Chinese, non-American, non-European, just that weird old country, Australian observer of the dialogue between India and China, both at a diplomatic level, but also on YouTube, on Geopolitics channels and all that sort of thing, there does seem to be, a lot of tension in that relationship. A lot of people kind of dismiss India, have different assessments of how successful Operation Sindoor is. And I've, on my world history tour at Jeffrey.Substack, I'm actually looking at all 5 of the great world powers in the current day, India, China, Europe, Russia, and the United States of America. I've actually looked at the USA and China, and my current series is looking at India. So do go over there to jeffrich.substack.com and get some real quality history from, some of the best available current day history of what's going on in all those countries, so that you can actually have a much better understanding of world affairs than listening to, ex-market analysts who sort of repeat nonsense from Halford Mackinder written 120 years ago. Okay, so that's the fourth question. Will an India-China rapprochement be the start of a new Eurasian peace? And then the fifth question is the biggest and hardest and scariest of them all, and that is this one right here. Has World War III already begun? As stated by Dmitri Trenin, Steve Bannon, a person who I do every now and then check in on what he's saying, although I don't often quote him, and Emmanuel Todd, who I do quote quite a lot on the show, as viewers will know, and Pope Francis, and even, although it's a little bit ambiguous what he said, I watched an extraordinary interview between Glenn Deason, who's been on the program, of course, and Jeffrey Sachs earlier today, where Jeffrey Sachs raised the question of whether, indeed, World War III had begun. And it is due to Jeffrey Sachs that I became aware that, indeed, that was something that Pope Francis, now dead, of course, said a little while ago. So that's what I'm going to do today, and as with last week, I'll release different segments of this stream in separate videos along the line. Now, I do see a few people making some interesting comments on the stream. Al Qaeda saying India being the wobbly wheel on the world power ox cart behind Germany. Everyone's got their weaknesses. You should go and check my Substack on looking at India as a world power. And Al Qaeda said World War III began in 1945 and fizzled out in the late 1990s. It could be revived. Now, that is a really perceptive point, Al. And I think it's Al, maybe it's AI Qaeda. It's a little bit hard to work out. I'm actually going to come back to that in a little while. All right, let's get in then to the first question of the show. Do send in your comments. Do make sure you sort of hit that like button and to help sort of spread the stream, and show your thanks if you wish. You can make super chats, you can contribute to thanks, or the very best thing to do, of course, is to go over to jeffrich.substack.com and join me as a paid subscriber and get all my deep dives and guides to history and world affairs. So, number one question is, will Donald Trump's 10 or 12 day ultimatum make a difference to war or diplomacy? Yes, just I think yesterday Donald Trump made this statement that he's changed his deadline from a 50-day deadline for Vladimir Putin to make peace or make a ceasefire. Not really a peace, that old American myth of the frozen conflict, but to make some sort of act of agreement with Donald Trump. He gave him a 10 or 12-day ultimatum to make a difference to the war. And already the Russian government, the Kremlin, has responded to this deadline change. The Russian president's spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, has said, they're aware of it, but they are just responding in the normal way. And I do believe that the nature of that diplomacy between Russia and America has been pretty vexed since it got back to some very, very basic steps in February. You can go back and check some of my earlier videos from that time where I made the point that the meeting between Marco Rubio, Sergei Lavrov and others in February or March this year was very much baby steps, and it was to some degree put by the Russians, much more so than by the Americans, as the start of a confidence building process. It was the start of a very elementary process, not of doing a grand deal or grand bargain in, geostrategic grandiosity tradition, but rather establishing the most basic elements of diplomacy, like, actually, agreeing to appoint an ambassador, a Russian ambassador to Washington, dealing with the issue of stolen diplomatic properties, establishing really, basic diplomatic procedures and processes. And so far, even those most basic steps have really just crawled to a virtual stop, despite the regular media attention to one or other statement by Donald Trump. So will this most recent ultimatum make a significant difference to the diplomacy? I'm not really sure. I think it probably won't. It is, like so much of Donald Trump's foreign policy, a lot of bluff and bluster and, self-focused kind of comments, but it's not necessarily really doing very much. And I see Songs 4K says Trump is trying to establish dominant signals, but they break down. And that is absolutely true. You watch almost every appearance of Donald Trump with a foreign leader from the White House, and it's all about him. It's almost he's compulsively driven to kind of, prove that he's the one and only machismo alpha male in the room. He did it with Ursula von der Leyen the other day. He did it famously with Zelensky earlier in the year. He does it with everyone. And I guess people kind of play along to some degree, but I really think it does not help them one little bit. And I see here, Bella Krinkle says, how can World War III not be revived considering the massive disruptions worldwide? Great question. I'm going to be getting to that later in the stream. In fact, I had a conversation the other day with Pascal Latas from Neutrality Studies, and that interview is going to be released in the next day or two, a couple of days. And to some degree, we were discussing this very question of, is this World War III? How do we frame the narrative of World War I, World War II, World War III? Is it like what one of the viewers was saying a little bit earlier on, that World War III began in 1945 and it's been continuing ever since. How do we actually sort of imagine the historical narrative of the conflicts between great powers arguably since 1910? And I'm going to suggest one way that is really helpful, I think, for people, and that I've also discussed in my kind of series on the rise and fall of the rise and fall of global empires on the channel. So my sense of things is Trump's 10 or 12-day ultimatum to Russia will really not make a difference. What's making the difference now, and is perhaps driving a lot of the concern, is the advance of Russia on the battlefield. Significant gains, I guess, around Pokrovsk and other areas in recent days, and clearly some level of collapse of morale, authority, and organisation of the Kiev government at the moment, as indicated by the protests, which we'll get to in a second. But I did mention that there is something uncanny and quite disturbing about Trump's 10 or 12-day ultimatum. Now, I did the calculate. Of course, Australia is a day ahead of the United States time, so this may not be. But I think this still holds because I calculated when exactly 10 days from today it was, and it is the 9th of August. Now, if this comment, oh, hello, hello, Bogan Intelligentsia, hello, Joel Jenkins, fantastic to see you, and it's good to see you've got a few fans there on the show as well, with AI Qaeda as well. So, and do say hello anyone who is joining the stream. It's really great to have this sort of interaction as well. And if you want to ask me questions, I'll also come back to questions a little bit later in the stream. So what is 10 days from now? It is the 9th of August. And what happened 80 years ago on the 9th of August? It's a pretty scary thought when we're talking about, World War III. What happened on the 9th of August, 1945, was the United States of America dropped the second atomic bomb on Nagasaki. There you go. And if Donald Trump was talking a day or two ago, our time, he would have been referring to that 12-a-day deadline would have been perhaps Nagasaki. The 10-day deadline may well have been the 6th of August when the United States of America dropped a bomb on Hiroshima. Yes, that's right, Jexter Jackson, Hiroshima, indeed. And thanks, Jim. I'm really glad you're enjoying the discussion. And I will just, and I see Aziz saying, how dare Putin upset Orange Man Baby. Orange Man Baby, yeah, I think that's the term Jamal Thomas also uses to describe Donald Trump. So is Donald Trump, even if ignorantly, making some sort of association between the resolution of this situation and the way the United States of America chose to conclude World War II by dropping 2 atomic bombs with devastating, horrendous, long-lasting consequences on Japan, on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. They still have not apologized for that, let us all add. There are people in America like Lindsey Graham who say, well, if it was good enough for us, then Israel should be able to drop a nuclear bomb on Gaza. Truly appalling sort of ideas. But it is a bit of a scary thought, and I do wonder what the hell is going through the mind of not just Donald Trump, but the governing elite in the United States of America. I haven't heard any speculation that America will apologize for, again, for the atomic bomb. Joe Biden never did. Barack Obama never did. Clinton never did. No one ever did. And there's far too many sort of unrepentant supremacists in the United States political elite, unfortunately. Okay, let's talk about the second question that I have scheduled for today, and that is, where are we here? How important are the Ukraine protests, and is Ukrainian society rebelling against the Zelensky monopower regime? Now, the monopower regime, just to explain that term, is a term that I heard Tariq Cyril Amar, who's a historian, who writes on Substack, great Substack, which I subscribe to, and also appears on, writes regularly in various publications, and is also appears with Kevork Amassian on Syriana Analysis, one of the absolute top geopolitics channels. It's a great way to get a sort of a non-mainstream European perspective on events. And of course, Kevork is originally Syrian and is probably the best and shrewdest analysis of the absolute tragedy of what's happened in Syria over recent years. But Tariq Siroamar speaks and reads Russian and Ukrainian and German and English, and is a brilliant analyst of the situation in there, and has been writing since 2021 about the development of a more authoritarian regime in Ukraine. Which is called by the Ukrainians a system of monovlada. So in English, monopower. Autocratic, you could say. A consolidation of power around a single person, or at least a single group within the regime. And that has, to some degree, been the event or the issue that has appeared in the protests behind the question of corruption. Is actually a question about a lack of pluralism in Ukrainian society, a lack of pluralism in the Ukrainian political system. There are the little protests that have occurred are, notionally against the law in Ukraine. Mass media is prevented. There's opposition members are jailed. All sorts of people are frankly persecuted, including Marta Havryshko, the extraordinary historian who has, documented the role of the far-right extremists in Ukraine over time. And so it is not, Ukraine is not a liberal democracy, absolutely not, and one should absolutely not think that. And so this sudden turn in the protests is quite interesting. Now, there has been a debate, which I did discuss in my extended deep dive interview with Marta Havryshko, which I've included in the video link description below, about what is going on. And one of the things that Marta Havryshko commented on is this man. This is Valery Zaluzhny, the former general in charge of Ukraine, who has been, if you like, sent into exile in Britain as the ambassador to Britain, even though he doesn't speak English. And he is photographed here, or I don't think he speaks English, and he is photographed in a special photo shoot for Vogue that has just come out. Is he being lined up to be the next president or whatever of Ukraine? Indeed, let me just check I've got the right thing here. Oh yes, I'll come back to that in a second. So there is a lot of speculation about whether the protests are astroturfed, whether they're made up, whether they're not really genuine, or whether they are indeed genuine. My view is that they are a bit of a mix. Like most protests, if you've ever been to a protest anywhere on anything in your life, you'll notice that there are people brought to a protest for all sorts of reasons. And indeed, I see what we got. Jexter Jackson saying, media curtailed. Where have I heard that before? Yes, indeed. Indeed. It's happened quite a bit in the West over recent years. And I've sort of commented on that in videos over time. And we've got, what have we got here from AI Carter saying, Vogue, Estee Lauder, Hugo Boss. Yes, indeed. So my assessment of these protests, which I discussed at length with Marta Havryshko the other day, is they are a mix. There is a genuine, spontaneous, very powerful political emotion of a sense of betrayal, I think, in Ukrainian society, that whether it was well-grounded or not, the dream of many, many Ukrainians in the early 2010s, 2013, 2014, that a break from, Russian political, the sort of, Soviet political traditions, the party oligarchs who ran Ukraine from 1991, towards a more European model of democracy and the economy, a closer integration with the European Union, that has been dashed not only by Russia and its war, but by the actions of the Ukrainian government itself. And many of the protests, hence having a whole series of references that are bringing back, describing Zelensky as a second Yanukovych, the person who was displaced in 2013, 2014, and other things like that. Now, of course, any political protest requires organisation, and there's no doubt some level of organisation there. But on the whole, I think there is a genuine high level of spontaneous political emotion going on in these protests. Now, it doesn't mean they will achieve their results. It doesn't mean that that emotion won't be exploited by, cynical people, both within Ukraine and outside Ukraine, to achieve some other objective. But the reality is, it is, I think, a significant protest. There's certainly manoeuvring, as there is in any protest or any political movement, I guess, in any country. And I've noticed here Songs 4K says it looks like a fragmenting coalition permitted by external patrons. And look, that's true. And I think do check out Marta Havryshko's discussion in detail of some of this. It is a fragmented coalition. Almost every coalition is. But I also think it is a response to that monopower, that sense of how else is Ukrainian society going to find its way out of the very oppressive conditions that they're placed in under the Zelensky regime, mass conscription, compulsory and brutal, press ganging, bussification, pulling people off the streets and sending them off to the war. The slogan "corruption kills" is, I think, very much a direct reference to the fact that corruption in the political regime is killing people, literally sending them to a needless war, and also weakening, I guess, the war effort. And now those people are very much, as Marta said, they are supporters of the war. They want a different approach to it. They want a way to do it that may not indeed be really achievable, I guess. And I think in some degree it doesn't have to be achievable. They are expressing their point of view, and quite bravely so. And I don't think people should sort of dismiss that, even though one should be absolutely objective and serious-minded about the fact that people will exploit that situation for various ways. And here Bella Krinkle says, well stated, this is certainly how things appear. Finally, although I'm not enough verbal to describe it to others. Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely understand. So yeah, do check out the video with Marta Havryshko. I think it is really terrific. And let me just share some other comments there. Jexter Jackson says we formed a clandestine military intelligence agency, are accountable to almost no one, then sent them out into the world. Why haven't we achieved world peace yet? Indeed, I assume you're talking about, CIA. I think there should be an international commission into the CIA. I think, the time for America to do that is over. I know that's perhaps a forlorn hope, as forlorn a hope of some of those Ukrainian protesters, but I really do think it should be dealt with. And Andrew Wotherspoon says, I wonder if Europe could undergo a resurrection in its economic fortunes were Russia and Ukraine itself brought into its economic orbit. I think the Americans don't want this. Absolutely. I think that is very much at the heart of it. And that will come back, I think, when we talk about the prospect of a new Eurasian peace a little bit later on in the show. And one last comment before I move to the next topic. Songs 4K says, corruption kills is ambiguous. It works for both liberals and nationalists. Absolutely. I mean, that slogan works for people in all sorts of ways. And that's the case with any successful political slogan, I think. Absolutely. Very wise comment there from Songs 4K. All right, let me just lubricate my mouth so I don't go totally hoarse, and we'll move on to the next topic, which is this one. Will the Ukraine leadership or regime change after reports of a secret meeting with the USA and or Britain? Now, let's see, what are we talking about here? I might just focus in on this. So there have been reports and this is here from the Russian news agency TASS. It's been reported in various places. I might just sort of bring up the size of that so maybe people can read it a little bit easier. Okay. So these reports have been spreading in the last few days that, and we'll just read this here, Moscow, July 29, TASS, the United States and the United Kingdom decided to nominate Ukraine's former commander-in-chief Valery Zaluzhny for president at a secret meeting in the Alps. Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, the SVR, said in a statement made available to TASS. According to a report, now, let me just add here, qualification here. This is an intelligence agency putting some information out there. It may or may not be true, but I guess it is also, I guess, a sign that there is this cracks in the authority, I guess, in the control and the coordination of the regime in Ukraine that people are sort of starting to question. So let's read on. According to reports received by SVR, US and British officials organised a secret meeting at an alpine resort which involved Andriy Yermak, head of the Ukraine president's office. Widely reported, very influential person. I discussed him with Marta Havryshko in my interview earlier this week. Kirill Budanov, chief of the Ukrainian Defense Ministry's main directorate of intelligence, head of military intelligence, a person mocked by people like Mark Sloboda as the man who's once said that he likes to, sit in the dark. And Valery Zaluzhny, the country's ex-commander-in-chief who now serves as Kiev's ambassador to London, and, of course, who is now a budding young Vogue model. And so, according to these reports, the Americans and the British announced their decision to propose Zelensky to the Ukrainian presidency. Yermak and Budanov snapped a salute while securing promises from the Anglo-Saxons, that's the Americans and the British, to let them keep their present positions as well as to take their interests into account in the course of making decisions over other personnel issues, such as perhaps corruption agencies and who should lead corruption agencies and what investigations should be performed by corruption agencies. So there is a very much an indication there that things might be shifting, that perhaps the West is wanting to install a new candidate. Now, in my interview with Marta Havrishko, we also talked about Zelensky's a military man. He's associated with the far right. Is he really a solution at all for Ukraine's problems? And is the West really thinking about what's good for Ukrainian society in coming up with a solution? And I guess the answer to that question is almost certainly he is not. Now, let's just have a quick look at this one here. I think you can see that okay. Maybe we'll do it like this. Nope. Yeah, let's do it like this, I think. So this is a report that's appeared in, I think, Ukrainian media in the last 24 hours. A report from a Ukrainian opposition journalist in exile, Anatoly Shalery, that Zelensky is preparing to dismiss the head of his presidential office, Andrei Yermak. According to Shalery, Yermak is making last-ditch efforts to salvage his standing. But Zelensky, increasingly isolated and clinging to power, has decided to cut him loose. Clearly, I am not on the ground. I do tune in occasionally to various Ukraine sort of news channels. I regularly watch the show done by Alexei Arestovich on a weekly basis discussing events in Ukraine. Those sort of shows are, they're sort of banned in Ukraine, and they may or may not represent genuine views. But I guess all I'm saying here is we're looking at some significant, possibly, quite likely, and the events over the last week or two in Ukraine almost certainly justify this, a lot of manoeuvring going on around issues. A couple of weeks ago, Andrei Yermak was being promoted in the way that Vogue model Valery Zaluzhny was, and it may well be that he has overplayed his hand. All just things are getting rather difficult and desperate over there in Ukraine. Maybe, you never know, maybe this 10 days warning is also something that our friend Volodymyr Zelensky is thinking about. Okay, so that is the third question I wanted to talk about today. The fourth question, and I noticed that a few people were expressing a bit of skepticism about Zelensky. Absolutely, and you should absolutely tune into the discussion of that by Marta Havrishko, who's an extraordinarily brave and insightful historian who's been harassed by the Zelensky regime for just speaking the truth, and which is hardly really democratic or in concordance with Western European values, but there it is. And I do feel that he will not be a solution. But, see, just because the MI6 and CIA think they're the cleverest guys in the room doesn't mean they are. I mean, after all, they've helped create this absolute fiasco situation in Ukraine and around the world. The schemes of CIA and MI6 rarely end well, and I fear for the poor suffering people of Ukraine who are being subjected, it seems, to yet more schemes from the CIA and the MI6. Okay, let's shift gear a little bit and go to our fourth question, which is about let me just double check I haven't missed anything important there. Yes. The fourth question, which is about a broader question in a way, and also not just Europe, not just Russia, not just America, but what I argue is probably the most important bilateral relationship in the world, the relationship between the two biggest countries in the world, the two are the only two countries in the world that have more than 1 billion people, India and China. There are signs that despite the tensions, despite the sort of digital warriors, despite the military conflict in 2020, despite trade tensions, despite diplomatic tensions, despite Operation Sindoor, there may indeed be some kind of India-China rapprochement in the wings. There might be some acceptance, some growing acceptance maybe in China that, India has an entitlement to develop and rise. I read, I think earlier today, that India has now exceeded China in terms of exports of smartphones to the USA. And there are a number of other sorts of trade, cultural, and other issues that are signs of improvement in relationships. It was severely strained by Operation Sindoor, and that comes out in the debate in the Indian National Assembly that was held yesterday. And I might well do some more programs on this India-China relationship and indeed Operation Sindoor, because I think my assessment of Operation Sindoor is quite different to many of the geopolitical channels. But on YouTube, which, tend to be kind of pro-American, pro-China sort of thing, one or other of those camps. And, there's an extraordinary, vital and intelligent and well-informed group of YouTube commentary channels on Indian situation, which I really think it is. Thank you, Studio Rana. And I see that, has anyone found a solution to avoid nuclear ultimatum? Well, we are going to talk about that in a second. Thank you very much for your support, Studio Rana. So what was I saying? Yes, the India-China relationship may be on the way back. It's an issue that has really been discussed an awful lot in Indian media, and that I really recommend people check out some of the Indian YouTube channels and media that discuss these issues to get a broader and richer perspective on India's role in the world. And of course, that's also the focus of my current leg of the World History Tour at jeffrich.substack.com. So the India-China relationship is crucial. Now, often when people talk about Eurasia, people like Pepe Escobar and people like that, when they talk about Eurasia, they do tend tend to, focus on Russia, China, Iran, that sort of thing, but they don't really focus so much on South Asia. And I think this has been a real flaw of Australian diplomacy over the years. We kind of keep tending to treat our engagement with Asia as an engagement with China, or with East Asia, or China and ASEAN. A focus on the most prosperous and most, the high growth areas, economic growth areas, a narrow economic focus on the relationship with Asia. But it has been changing, I think, over recent years, a greater focus on India, but I think it really is really critical. And in the Indian media itself, there has also been a lot of discussion, speculation that some of the thank you, Junior Plan. Thank you for your insight information very much. Thank you very much for your contribution, Junior Plan, and your support for the channel and your comments. I really admire your comments that I've seen over time. I think both on YouTube and Substack, if I remember correctly. So yeah, there has been speculation in the Indian media about factional or leadership disputes within China itself. A curtailing of Xi Jinping's power, that sort of thing, which they see as in some respects related to the disposition of the armed forces or the political groups or different groups within the armed forces and political groups towards India. Some people have said, and Ayakata says, Australia's future appears to be in ASEAN. We should strive for neutrality, which is a great comment. I don't know if I'm saying your name right, Al or AI Carter, but thank you very much for your comments. And so yeah, there has been this speculation that one of the issues internally being debated within China is whether it should be more or less aggressive, more or less cooperative with India. And at the Kazan BRICS summit in 2024, there was a widely reported sort of, corridor type, sidebar sort of conversation between Xi Jinping and Narendra Modi, which many people saw as the start of a thaw in the relationship. And it does seem to be progressing further. And kind of what I wanted to highlight for people today is just show you a little video here, which is a video of Sergei Lavrov talking, I think, to a group of Russian diplomats in the last day or so about a plan for Eurasian security arrangements, Eurasian Peace, which is more focused on the countries of Eurasia cooperating together and not having their security dictated by external powers, not from Eurasia, principally, of course, the United States of America. So let me just share with you this little clip, which goes to this question of the central importance of a better relationship between India and China, while accepting that India is always going to want to balance and have a strong connection with the United States. But if India and China can get on a little bit better, then that will also improve the prospects of Eurasian peace and security. So let me just add this to the stage. Hang on. I'll just plug in my own earplugs so I can actually hear what our friend Sergei Lavrov, that's him there, speaking at this conference, what he has to say. I might just make this just him, and let's listen.
Creating what is called the Greater Eurasian Partnership, the post-Soviet associations, the SCO, ASEAN, and other promising players. Eurasia is the only continent that does not have a uniting continental association. Africa does have one. They have many regional integration structures, but they also have a global one. Latin America also have many sub-regional organizations, but they also have CELAC. But Eurasia does not yet have such an organization. Several years ago, the Russian president spoke at the Russia-ASEAN summit and proposed that we support these sub-regional processes to help them complement each other so that their programs help remove duplication of efforts and that the Greater Eurasian Partnership can arise from a combination of these efforts as a natural process, not as a top-down initiative. It would just be a natural process that would result from a desire to maximize benefits and to make the best use of available resources. Speaking more broadly, it would become a firm foundation, a material foundation for shaping a Eurasian security architecture. The entities in charge of security right now are, first of all, what was created in Europe after the war, the OSCE, NATO, but both of these entities are premised on the concept of Euro-Atlantic security. So it requires participation from our colleagues from beyond the Atlantic. Well, of course, there's nothing bad in cooperating with the US or with Canada, but why cannot we have a continental system that would be open for everyone on the continent, especially since we're seeing that President Trump does not have a particular desire to maintain a role in Europe, preferring to deal with America's own problems, with the
So, yes, there we are. And it's interesting. So what he is saying there is actually something that has been discussed at a very high, at the sort of strategic leaders level between China and Russia, very much so, endorsed at several meetings by those presidents, and also it is, been a strong theme, particularly around Russian foreign policy, but also Chinese foreign policy, and is now starting to take shape in a more specific movement towards this sort of Eurasian security architecture, to have Eurasia, the defense, security of Eurasia arranged through collective and multilateral arrangements between the countries of Eurasia, which of course includes the countries of the European Union as well, all the way through to China, and arguably also the sort of, archipelago coastal fringe of Eurasia, like Japan, and critically for Australia, Indonesia, a member of the BRICS, to establish a sort of collective Eurasian security arrangement. This is a major development, I think, and I think one of the key impediments to it has been the tension around the relationship between China and India, which got seriously reversed in the 2010s and 2020 in particular, both around the issue of terrorism and Chinese support for Pakistan, but also direct border conflicts between China and India, as well as interventions in the sort of broad region of India as well. So I really do think there are probably quite a few diplomatic moves underway to secure at least enough of a modus vivendi between India and China that this sort of collective security arrangement for Eurasia can proceed. It's a long-term development, but it is one also very much linked to our next theme and our final question for the stream today, which is, about World War III. Because, there we go, has World War III already begun, as stated by Dmitri Trenin, Steve Bannon, Emmanuel Todd, Pope Francis, or even Jeffrey Sachs? But before we answer that question, as I say, one of the outcomes of World War II was what historian John Darwin describes as the partition of Eurasia. I've described this in a few videos on the channel. Do check them out. And most recently, of course, in my video on the post-1945 world. And it is one of the key facts of the post-1945 world that for the first time in human history, an external power, the United States of America, entrenched itself at both ends, or you could even say at all the four cardinal points of Eurasia. It entrenched itself in Europe. It entrenched itself in the Middle East / West Asia. It entrenched itself in South Asia, a little bit more in a more complex way, but in part through the relationship with Pakistan. And it also entrenched itself in East Asia, in the South Pacific. South Korea was divided. Japan was occupied and subjected to, various forms of de facto control. Taiwan was occupied. Philippines, was nominally no longer a colony, but a very, very large military base. And in many ways, I think you can actually see what's going on in the West Pacific and East Asia at the moment as the United States sort of digging in this sort of West Pacific, East Asian region. It's digging in a defensive manner to avoid being pushed out of the region. But it's certainly my view that over time this is a totally unsustainable military presence in a region that is far, far from America. Just as, why on earth is the United States still occupying, huge military bases in Europe? It's using them as offensive bases to go into the heart of the Eurasia and, maintain the mad dreams of Halford Mackenda to control the world island. And this is, I think, very much related to this final question of has World War III already begun, as stated by Dmitri Trenin, Steve Bannon, Emmanuel Todd, Pope Francis, or even the economist Jeffrey Sachs. And why is that? Well, let me just have a quick drink. That is because, again, part of the breakdown of the post-1945 world is the breakdown of the partition of Eurasia. In a way, the conflict in Ukraine is part of that conflict. In 1991 or 1989, the Cold War ended. But the partition of Eurasia in the sort of whatever that is, the western part of Eurasia, did not end. In fact, it sort of pushed deeper into the heartland. NATO expanded ever eastward, and at a certain point, Russia said, "This is enough. We cannot tolerate this. We can see what you're doing, and it's not going to end well." But I think in Eastern Eurasia, what we are seeing is Not necessarily a aggressive movement deeper, like it's not like like in Europe, expansion of NATO forward. It's more an entrenchment of that position. I think America probably has given up on any plans to regime change China. Who knows? I'm sure there are a few crazies in America who still do that. But it absolutely has just assumed into all of its plans that this weird, anomalous situation of American military occupation of East Asia and the West Pacific is just a geostrategic fact that will never change. And I think that that is not the case. I saw Warwick Powell, who's of course been on the show quite a few times, say the other day, and was my guest on a live stream last week. I will have other guests on these live streams before too long, say that certainly in his view, over the next 10 to 20 years, the United States is going to be pushed out of East Asia and the South Pacific. And I think this is the big, long conflict that is sort of brewing, and one of the reasons why one might say World War III has begun. Now, who are these various people who that we are talking about here? Dmitri Trenin, Steve Bannon, Emmanuel Todd, Pope Francis, and even Jeffrey Sachs. Why have they been saying World War III has begun? Now, Dmitri Trenin is a Russian scholar who lived in America for a long time, was very much seen as, part of the pro-Western, pro-American intellectual class of America. He's part of the Carnegie Moscow group, that sort of thing. He's recently been moved back to Russia, indeed been, sanctioned and mistreated as ever by the United States government. But he has recently published an article that Pascal Lataz on Neutrality Studies did a great video about, where he said World War III has already begun. That one of the things about World War III is it's not going to be fought in exactly the same way as World War II, but that the number and scale of global conflicts at the moment is sufficient for us all to say that indeed World War II has begun. World War III has begun. Steve Bannon, the sort of, mega strategist, podcast host, former advisor to Donald Trump, has said similar things in the United States. Steve Bannon is also a bizarre China hawk who talks about taking down the CCP and all this sort of thing. So I don't really entirely trust his judgment, but it also might be a confession on his part that the USA's, full spectrum war against China in military domains, in information and, propaganda domains, in economic domains and in diplomatic domains is very much on. Indeed, some people even, draw links between that sort of conflict and the big events of 2020. And then Pope Francis, yes, I was listening to Glenn Deason's interview with Jeffrey Sachs on Glenn Deason's fantastic show earlier today, and there Jeffrey Sachs mentioned that Pope Francis had said for some time that World War III has perhaps begun. And Jeffrey Sachs himself seemed to admit this, and that it may well be that all these global conflicts, all these very dangerous global conflicts are indeed amounting to World War III, and it's happening at a time when the quality of leadership is incredibly poor in the United States, and it's a really deep, deep concern. So what do I think about all this? I'll just take this little banner off for a second because we don't need all those names there. It's a really interesting question. Actually, it's a question I also discussed with Pascal Lataz in the interview for Neutrality Studies that will be coming out in the next few days. So do check that out. I don't want to reveal too much about kind of what I said in that. But it does relate, I think, to some of the comments that were made earlier on in the program. If I just sort of whip back to those earlier comments, I'm sorry I've missed some of the latest comments. And can I just make a request of Joshua MTZCHZ, Joshua Matches. I don't speak Spanish, but if you want to put your comment or your chat thing into the comment section of the video, I'll reply to that later once I get a chance to translate it. I'm just not confident I can do that live. Same applies to anyone else who's asked. I can see Gabrielle Rio similarly. So do, if you are still there, do send in your comment in that way. And there were some great questions earlier on that I'm just trying to find that were, here we go. This is what I was talking about. World War III began in 1945 and fizzled out in the late 1990s. It could be revived. And I thought there was a comment here. How can World War III not be revived considering the massive disruptions worldwide? And I thought there might have been another comment along these lines, but I just can't find it at the moment. I guess here we've got this comment here from Andrew Wallaspooner. I wonder if Europe could undergo a resurrection in its economic fortunes were Ukraine and Russia itself brought into its economic orbit. I think the Americans don't want this. Yeah, I mean, my view is Europe should, get with the program of that collective Eurasian security. Tell America to get the hell out and stop interfering and having its soldiers run over every part of the earth, and have genuine sort of better relationships with people. But I'll leave the comments there for now. But yes, what do I think about this question? Well, I think, again, as I was saying a little bit earlier on, it depends a little bit upon how you frame the story of what happened in the 20th century around World War I, World War II, and the various crises. The end of the Cold War. The familiar narrative is World War I happened, and then there was, the rise of fascism in Europe. Then Britain and America came to save the day. Forget the fact that Germany then invaded the Soviet Union. Won World War II. The United Nations was founded. The post-1945 World Order was founded. There was a Cold War fought. Millions died in many countries around the world, including brutally in the first war of the Cold War, or the second war of the Cold War, the Korean War. But we won't mention that. America won the Cold War, and then the liberal rules-based order prevailed. And this is a complete distortion of, I think, history. And often when we talk about World War III, I feel it's almost like we're setting up this sort of Rocky I, Rocky II, Rocky III sort of series. That Rocky I was World War I, and, Europe was saved by America due to its internal conflicts. And then Rocky II, the sequel, happened when Europe again had a civil war, and America came to the rescue. Of course, it fought against Japan in the East as well, but, let's not talk about that atomic bomb. And then World War III will similarly be a repeat of the series when, of course, the hero of our story, the USA, is going to win again. And I think that is a fundamental mistake. And what is really interesting here is that some of the best historians around, including, I think, Richard Overy, who's written an extraordinary new, has recently done a sort of interpretive rewrite of World War II in a book called Blood and Ruins, which I really should review or summarize on the channel at some point. Blood and Ruins, the Great Imperial War, 1931 to 1945. So if you talk about the history of the 20th century, not as a sequence of World War I, World War II, Cold War, the end of history, but rather as a totally different series, a global imperial war, which was originally called the Great War between 1914 and 1918, that broke out and in a way never really ended in 1918. John Darwin's history in After Tamerlan, as I've described in my Rise and Fall series, really describes this period as a war without end. It's a very ambiguous and confused ending to war in 1918 because, of course, there's a civil war which kills millions of people in the Soviet Union. There is wars on the European continent involving Poland and Hungary. There's the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire and major conflicts which almost break out in serious, major, a reactivation of a global war between Britain and the arguing over the remnants of the Ottoman Empire. There's the Japan-China conflict in the early part of the 20th century. So it's and the sort of revolutions, nationalism. It's a very, very complicated and vexed period in the 1920s, which is really misrepresented in a lot of these discussions. I can see Kuznets say, the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s as well. And of course, World War II was not just fought in Europe. World War II was fought around the world, in Africa, in Europe, in the Pacific, in East Asia, in South Asia. And, of course, the dating of Richard Overy's Blood and Ruins, the last of the Great Imperial War, 1931 to 1945, rewrites the story of World War II as a conflict that begins when Japan marches into Manchuria in East Asia. He rewrites the story too in terms of, the major territorial national empires of Japan, Italy, and Germany, challenging the established powers of Britain, France, and the United States of America. And so I think if you have that different framing of things. Oh, and then the Cold War. Let's talk about the Cold War as well. In the Soviet Union, no one ever talked about the Cold War. The Cold War was a very vexed propaganda term that was originally invented really in the West and in part deployed, following the sort of Berlin blockade and with a lot of reserve, but it was in many ways defined initially by the Korean War. Again, a war in Asia, not in Europe. So our meaning, our sequence of events, and then as someone said, did America ever really stop fighting the Cold War against Russia after the dissolution of the Soviet Union? There have been so many American politicians who've said over the last decades that we fight them over there so we don't have to fight them over here. So it is really quite challenging. So it is, I think if you reframe that story, you sort of start to question the whole idea of World War III. And it's not necessarily like it won't necessarily appear in the same form. And I think this is where I why I've always been very reluctant to say we're in World War III, because I think it's sort of falling into that sort of sequence of things. But I think what we are definitely seeing is there is a global conflict that is emerging and is occurring across the world that may as well, I guess, be called World War III. You know, John Darwin in After Tamerlan also uses this term called the crisis of the world to describe the whole period from sort of 1910 to 1945, encompassing both world wars. There was a crisis of the world, and then there was this strange period after 1945 when America emerged as one of two undeclared empires that seemed for a while to be an unlimited empire. And I think if you have that kind of sequencing, you get a very different concept of what the post-1945 world is and what the story of World War I, World War II, whatever the global conflict we are in today. I think in many ways what you could say is today we are now in another crisis of the world, like the crisis of the world that encompassed a whole series of cultural, economic, diplomatic, social and other conflicts, military conflicts between 1910 and 1945, all those sort of events that we've been talking about and that people have been adding in there. I can see some people are talking about 100 Years' War. At times I've talked about how there's been 100 years war between the Anglo-American powers and Russia, because after all, Britain and the United States both invaded the Soviet Union as part of the Civil War in the Soviet Union in 1918 through to 1921. So I do think I can see Gabriel Rio saying Latin America was spared from the First World Wars, but it decisively lost the Cold War. Would be interesting if you could elaborate on the subject someday. Yeah, absolutely. I really do want to do some more material on Latin America, because that's a really interesting and important comment that you make there, Gabrielle. And yeah, absolutely. So that, I think, is the situation that we're in today. We're in another crisis of the world. Arguably, you could say, for to give it a sort of starting point, it might be 1999 with the bombing of Serbia, bombing of the breakup and bombing of the former Yugoslavia. It might be 2007, 2008, the famous declaration of multipolarity by Vladimir Putin at the Munich Security Conference. It could be 2008 when, if you like, there was a declaration of war by the United States in saying Ukraine and Georgia should be part of NATO, and NATO should, go invade deep into the heart of the world island. Or you could even say, perhaps, and there was indeed a war fought around that time in Georgia. So I think 2008 is perhaps not a bad start for this crisis, but certainly I would say 2022 is when this real crisis of the world started to develop into a very acute phase, clearly with the war in Ukraine and the sort of global conflict that it then instigated. So I think that's the best way of thinking about it. Yes, I think in a way we are in World War One, but it won't World War Three. Sorry, and it won't necessarily be in the same manner and the same form as World War One and World War Two. It may not be such a war of total destruction and devastation, but it's also, there are different ways in which the wars are conducted. We've seen this with drones and with surveillance and with information control, all that sort of thing. We're not going to see a repeat of World War II. We're going to see the different kind of conflict that is related to the current day crisis of the world. And I think that's very relevant. And I just wanted to mention in this context something that people might want to check out on YouTube. Where are we? We'll just do it like this here. So this is there we go. This is a couple of lectures by the historian Dominique Lieven, which I highly recommend if you're interested in the story of empires and geopolitics in Eurasia. Dominique Lieven, I think, is one of the best living historians. I think I've reviewed maybe or commented on some of it, recommended his books previously on the channel. He's written a great book about the Napoleonic Wars, Russia against Napoleon, emphasizing that, Russia basically liberated Europe from Napoleon. It wasn't just the cold weather in Moscow. He's also written an extraordinary book about the start of World War One. And in the bottom of those lectures, Imperial Politics in Eurasia and the World, he does comment how he is often troubled at the moment about the similarities between today's events and the eve of World War One. August 1914. Maybe we're walking now into August 2025. Will it be such a disastrous set of decisions as it was then? He says he who has studied this period incredibly closely, he wrote a history really of World War One, looking, at the Eastern Front, if you like, the central importance of Russia, Germany, Austro-Hungary kind of conflict, rather than what's going on in Britain, France, and the United States. And he really went into depth into the sort of diplomacy of that, and says that these matters are kind of troublingly similar to today. And I think I commented in my interview with Richard Sachs on the program that the war fever that we've seen in the Western countries, including Australia, in recent years around Russia, has a horrible similarity to the war fever that affected people across the political spectrum and the social spectrum in 1914 as war broke out. Suddenly, people from different cultures and civilizations were dehumanized, treated as the enemy. Anything was justified in a bizarre glorification of nationalistic war. So it is a troubling comparison, I think, very much, and I highly recommend you do check out those videos from Dominique Lieven. Just, enter Dominique Lieven in recent talks or something like that into the YouTube search bar, and they will show up. He's speaking to a fairly, I guess he's speaking to a bit of an academic audience. And he's a little bit like me. He doesn't really like the term geopolitics. It's a term I use. He's much more focused on, I guess, the complexities of world history, which is what I really focus on here. So, yeah, there are our 5 questions. Let me just recap what I've covered in the stream. What have we got here? I'll bring them all back and we'll just do the top line answers. Will Trump's 10 or 12-day ultimatum or 50-day or whatever it's going to be tomorrow day ultimatum to Russia make a difference to war or diplomacy? I think probably not, but I am troubled by the erratic nature of the decision-making in the American government, and that goes to Dominique Lieven's concern, because it was, to some degree, the troubled minds and the erratic decision-making of German military command and Austro-Hungarian military command and Russian senior leadership as well, and British, perfidious Albion's decision-making as well, that contributed to World War One. How important are the Ukraine protests and is Ukrainian society rebelling against Zelensky's monopower regime? I think they are, and I think it needs to be evaluated as I guess, a active resistance to that oppressive, authoritarian monopower regime. I think monopower is actually a very good term for it, rather than a pluralistic power centre regime. I think it's probably a better term than authoritarian, although there are certainly what would be classically defined authoritarian elements in Ukrainian society. I don't think these protests are going to achieve a political objective in themselves. I fear that the genuine, honest and deep emotions of the people who are protesting will be manipulated by a very corrupt and very degraded political system in Ukraine. And indeed, on Thursday this week, I believe the Rada in Ukraine will be voting on things. However, let me just add this. I think I forgot to show people this earlier on. Oh, no, I did describe this as well. There is talk of all sorts of palace schemes going on right now in Ukraine. Will the Ukraine leadership or regime change after reports of a secret meeting with USA and Britain? I don't know. I do think often the schemes of these intelligence agencies are overindulged in the media, and more power is attributed to them than generally necessary. I've just recorded a video today for both Australian and international audiences, really, about the discussion of, like, did the USA coup the Australian government in 1975 or in 2010 with Kevin Rudd? And I think part of my lesson out of all that is sometimes we exaggerate the real power of these schemes. They are certainly playing a part, but the independent life of society in Ukraine is also playing a part as well. Will an India-China rapprochement be the start of a new Eurasian peace? Again, I think in the long term we are looking towards a new set of security arrangements in Eurasia, where the United States and Britain and Australia will be much less significant, that the sisters of Eurasia will be doing it for themselves. And I think that day can't come soon enough. But I am worried that the fear of that changing is very much one of the reasons why the United States may well fight a resentful, in a way, defensive war, a reactionary war, I think is perhaps a good way of putting it. A desperate last attempt to cling on to the impossibly powerful situation it enjoyed briefly after 1945 and more mythically after 1991. I fear, in a way, we are in the second great crisis of the world, just like the crisis of the world that stretched from 1910 to 1945. It's not a happy thought, and I certainly hope it doesn't lead to quite as much blood, ruins and ashes, atomic ashes, as occurred in the first crisis of the world. And I sincerely hope that Donald Trump's crazy 10 or 12-day ultimatum does not presage some sort of weird preemptive nuclear attack by the United States of America. But one should bear in mind that there are 9 nuclear powers around the world at the moment, and they have indeed been in active conflicts with each other over the last several years. So the risks of nuclear war are extremely high at the moment. And that is a pretty grim point at which to end. Let me just quickly check back over some questions. I can see mouse destruction helps us all lighten up just a little bit and say, will I be able to afford a house after the war, though? Thanks for that comment, mouse destruction. We've got TCW saying these plans are from the think tanks whom are later participants within the government, as such as those at West. Yeah, absolutely. Those think tanks are there. I also think in many ways some of these think tank plans are planted by people in the government. They represent schemes and projects of various factions within power. And let me just quickly skim over the... I'm sorry if I haven't responded to all the comments. I'm just quickly checking to see if I can see any specific questions. We've got mouse destruction. What's the chances of a demilitarized zone between Russia and Europe? You know what? I think I might do a more detailed sort of Ukraine endgame situation. Do check back on my video from a couple of weeks ago on Ukraine endgame, where I talked about Alexei Aristovich's discussion of a potential sort of redrawing of the boundaries between what used to be called Ukraine and Russia and Europe, to have a bit more of an in-depth discussion of that one. And what have we got here? What's the blue book in the back with the comment? With the comet. I can't read the spine. The blue book in the back with the comet. Oh, I think I know what you mean. If it's this one, I'm not 100% sure this is the one you meant. I'm just relying on my own poor vision of the screen. But there is a comet shown on the back of this book. This is the book, The Books of Jacob, by Olga Tokarczuk. I'll just do it a little bit further back there. It seems I don't know if it's mirroring there, but hopefully you can read that. And it is actually a book that it's actually something that I have in my Substack at the moment. I'll take your comment off. I've been doing a slow read of Olga Tokarczuk's The Books of Jacob. It's an absolutely brilliant historical novel about Poland in the 18th century, but it is uncannily relevant today. It features Halley's comet, which is why the comet is shown in the show, and you should check it out. I'll show you there. I've got. You can have a look at my slow read with Olga Tokarczuk, The Books of Jacob, and took about 6 months to do the slow read, and I'm sort of rerunning the slow read for everyone at the moment on the Substack at jeffrich.substack.com, and a few other comments about the Caucasus. What else have we got here? We've talked about Latin America, And so many rich comments. If you'd like to sort of throw in any other questions into the comments section on the video rather than the live chat, I will respond to them over the next couple of days as well. But I can sense my voice is getting just that little bit hoarse right now. As I said, it'd be great if people headed over to jeffrich.substack.com. As you can see, I'm doing the slow read that we've just discussed. I'm also doing the World History Tour, where I look at Russia, China, the United States, Europe, and currently India. What are these great powers? How can we understand them better with some of the better histories that are being written at the moment? I'm working through a brilliant Wolfson History Prize winning book by Joya Chatterjee, Shadows at Noon, the South Asian 20th Century at the moment. That's what these ones here are. Some great stories about the nature of the state in India, and also the extraordinary story of decolonisation, independence and partition in India. Very, very important part of the world's story. Indeed, Joya Chatterjee says, in South Asia, 1947 is the real crucial, is a more important milestone than 1945. Again, where you sit in the world, how you retell the story of the 20th century really changes your conception of what the post-1945 world is. And the post-1945 world is, if nothing else, a story of decolonisation. Arguably, we're entering into a new phase of decolonisation, American decolonisation, but that might be the subject of another video. I'd like to thank, here we go, we've got Gabrielle Rio saying there is a catastrophic collapse of leadership in the West, but if no internal rival can pick up the slack, what does that say of the entire society? Very much so. I've also just recorded a video this morning, which will come out in the next week or so, commenting on Václav Havel, the great Czech dissident and later president of Czechoslovakia and the Czech Republic, and his essay "The Power of the Powerlessness." And Bella Crinkle says, "Thank you, Jeff. All these quandaries are weighing me down. These conversations help me feel centered." I'm really glad, Bella. That is so important. And I feel also, have a watch of this video about the power of the powerlessness, because in a way it's also dealing with this exact quandary. I mean, who are we really to change this situation? But how do we live, in a sense, how do we live at peace with ourselves while these terrible things are happening, and yet we feel so powerless to actually change, stop, prevent them? And some really great questions. So everyone, please do add in any extra questions that you want to add into the comments along, and share. Hit the like button, share the video. I'm really appreciative of comments like yours, Bella Crinkle, because, I guess that's really why I do this show. I do it partly for my own sense of sanity and feeling at ease. Well, not at ease, but trying to make sense of what's going on, and yet wanting to live a decent life where, decent, good things happen. And all these distressing events that happen in the world, and there are so many distressing events in the world, we don't succumb to despair and all of that sort of stuff. Absolutely. So thanks to everyone for joining me. Do show your thanks, do share, do like, do support, and join me next week. I'm going to be doing these live streams regularly now on a Wednesday afternoon. I feel this is probably a good time. I might play around with different times, and I will do some solo like today, and I'll also be bringing some guests on like I did last week with Warwick Powell. So thank you everyone for joining me, and I hope you've also enjoyed. I've actually got myself a new webcam yesterday. I feel it's a much better image that I've got there. My actual webcam literally died in the middle of recording a video with Pascal Lataz the other day. You'll get to see the comedy of all that, hopefully, in the next couple of days. So if you haven't already, do check out Pascal's Neutrality Studies channel and his Substack, and head on, of course, over to my Substack as well at jeffrich.substack.com. And after that, I will sign out, and thank you all for joining me, and I will see you next week. And do check out my videos coming out in the next couple of days. Okay, bye now.